Okay, now we're going to do a greater timeline analysis, which has aspects of my personal life, but is actually much greater stuff, far beyond my tiny little existence, insignificant as it may be. So, in 2023, now this is after the golden age of YouTube and all that stuff. I have an account on a website called BitChute. My account, what the fuck? Sorry, we're having issues. My account on BitChute, it is banned in the European Union for incitement to hatred, out of respect for European Union laws on hate speech. So incitement to hatred, incitement to violence. Now I want to discuss that first. Because marijuana is illegal in my state, yet BitChute allows marijuana videos to be broadcast in my region, my sector, my state. So why is it that my videos aren't allowed to be broadcast in these other countries? They're watched with a VPN, but they don't respect our laws. And the weird thing about that is BitChute has more respect for freedom of speech in the United States than many American-owned companies. Pretty much all of them. So it doesn't make any sense. But let's get into what hate speech is, right? So if there's a connection between media and violence, why is Snoop Dogg allowed to incite so many gang-involved shootouts and violent altercations, drug overdose deaths, divorces, right? Like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why was Cheech and Chong allowed to incite so much drug use with a drug that is linked to violence? Marijuana is linked to violence, by the way. For like decades now, this has been known. Increased rates of violence, homelessness, harder drug use with the gateway drug effect, etc. Why is that? Doesn't make any sense to me, right? Why are they allowed to do this thing, but I'm not allowed to do that thing? It's very strange. It's very subjective. There's, a conflict of interest, of course. So whoever runs BitChute and other websites like this, they have their own personal agendas that they're implementing. And the weird thing is, the white supremacists will say, oh, it's the Jews, but BitChute is a white company. I'm pretty sure it's owned by white English, non-Jewish Gentiles, so, yeah. But, with that, why is it that, because it's easy to believe it is the Jews, why is it that racism and sexism and homophobia and anti-Semitism are hate speech, but pornography and drug use and drug pushing, drug promotion, drug propaganda is freedom of speech? Why is porn free speech, but racism is hate speech in the United States? How does that make any sense? Porn is worse than racism. No, I know the liberals will, what's wrong with porn? Bleh. Yeah, I could cite so many examples of why porn is bad, including the underage girls who were raped and their videos were uploaded to Pornhub. Not just that one girl with 58 of her videos of her being raped and assaulted while she was drugged. There's a ton more. There is a ton of violations of laws in the United States uploaded to Pornhub and other pornography websites. Way worse, in my opinion, than racism. But I think that real life violence is worse than pixels on a screen. But if you're going to connect those two, why not connect Dave Chappelle to the increased rates of marijuana consumption, thus the skyrocketing fentanyl overdose death rate in the United States, the methamphetamine overdose death rate in Ohio, his home state, and so forth and so on? Why be selective about this implementation? It's very weaponized censorship and propaganda. So, now, this is fun for me because it's like a self-applied quiz. I'm just testing my memory. This is a memory test. Let's go back to the 1800s, 1880s. Now, my understanding, the late 1880s, the late 1800s, early 1900s, was the time of Freud. It was the time of not just Sigmund Freud, but von Krafft-Ebing. Now, von Krafft-Ebing wrote this book, Psychopathia Sexualis. I have the 1965 Library of Congress edition. The one you can get on Amazon is 1/3 this size, but this one has smaller font. That's how much they cut out of this. This book was originally written with the with all his case studies, his clinical citations in Latin, because at the time you had to learn Latin to become a doctor, and this prevented the sheeple, the uneducated masses, the emotionally unstable, etc., from getting angry at things they weren't intelligent enough to understand objectively, and therefore becoming violent over things they were just too stupid to understand accurately. So much violence is rooted in stupidity, lack of education, and misunderstanding. I can't find a date on this. Let's go to Google. I think I'm going to use Google for most of this just to, validate, falsify my statements. But von Krafft-Ebing was a understudy of Sigmund Freud. The 1886. Yes, there we go. Now, in 1886, he was a forensic psychologist who investigated sex crimes for 14 years before running his own clinics. And he cites all of the data available from Western Europe in the Victorian age that he could get his hands on in this book. A lot of amazing case studies, actually. Very triggering stuff for those with a weak stomach. Don't do it. Don't read it. But he established a connection between homosexuality, transvestitism, pedophilia, fetishism, voyeurism, and sex murderers and rapists. And they all had a common pathology: early childhood masturbation or early childhood sexual experiences. So this means the wealthy, the elite, the group that's been known by many names, right? The Freemasons, the Illuminati, the 1%, the Bilderbergs, the plutocracy, right? Governments rise and fall, but these people always remain in power throughout history, no matter the circumstances. They have known since at least now, if not sooner, since at least 1886, if not sooner, that activating the sexual instinct of children can increase homosexuality rates in the general population. Not amongst everybody, there is genetic differences. Hierarchies naturally occur in nature, but for a certain percentage of the population. So now it's the deep state or the CIA in the United States, etc., but the people who run 9gag, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc., and Disney, of course, and Hollywood and things like that, are sexually activating the instinct of children early. In the 1800s, von Krafft-Ebing called it the corruption of the natural instinct. 1886, Krafft-Ebing. Now, this is about how capitalism corrupted Christianity. That's going to be one of the main focuses of this whole timeline analysis, but it's not just capitalism. So, what happened, say, we'll do one focal point as the 1930s, and another focal point as the 1960s. So what happened between 1886 and 1930? That is worthy of note. And no, I'm not talking about the foundation of the Federal Reserve. I don't link that to this. I'm sure some of you might. There's so much conspiracy theories out there. when you get into deeper and deeper into it, your head will spin just to keep up with all the bullshit. Excuse my language. Black, gray, and white propaganda. What is black propaganda in simple words? Blah, blah, blah. I need a date. In World War II, Cold War, yes. 1905. Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is an example of black propaganda. Oh, Benjamin Franklin did it in the American Revolution. So, between the 1886 and 1930 gap, we had a development of psychology. Now, psychology has been used throughout history, since the dawn of man. If you look at not just the Bible, that's not the oldest literature we have in the history of mankind. If you look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, when Enkidu is trapped by the hunter with a woman, that's manipulation, that's deception, that's psychology. That is applied psychology. The Greek philosophers, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, etc. They were reasonists, they were blah, 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 they were philosophers. That's psychology. It's just called psychology now. But here you had Sigmund Freud and Edward Bernays and Havelock Ellis, the uncle of Dr. Albert Ellis. Blah, 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 blah. So that's where propaganda really began to really advance, right? Because it was also the Industrial Revolution. And with the Industrial Revolution, you had the advent of technology, so it was easier to spread your propaganda far wider. Born Vienna, 1891, Edward Bernays, died Cambridge, Michigan, 1995. So, for those of you who don't know, and I highly suggest you educate yourselves on this one, Edward Bernays is the father of modern-day propaganda. His uncle was Sigmund Freud. He wrote a lot of books, some that I want to read. If I had time, I could read all the books for days. And so he first started applying Freud's theories. The first thing that was a real success story for him was Philip Morris went to him to see if he could trick women into smoking cigarettes, which arguably is a form of applied eugenics, thinning the herd. But for Philip Morris, 50% of the market was untapped. So Edward Bernays put women smoking in television shows, commercials, magazine ads, billboards, radio ads. He hired women to smoke in the suffragette demonstrations and parades and things like that. He paid them to smoke in order to increase women's smoking. He had a whole campaign. He called it Torches of Freedom. So under feminism, he tricked women into doing something self-destructive in the name of women's rights. Very manipulative, very deceptive. And he did it through media, which wouldn't be possible, of course, without technology. At that time, it was the printing press, and, you know, television and radio were barely developing. So, yeah. But then we get the Great Depression, which Edward Bernays tricked people into taking out loans with no consideration of the consequences of the debt they were incurring in the future. The Great Depression, 1929 to 1939. Great Depression. So this was sort of when it was acknowledged that those who control the media have a responsibility not to use it to screw the poor over, because inevitably this will screw the rich over. It's like a foundation. If you destroy the foundation, the top floor will collapse. Don't need the poor to the that much, but labor, agriculture, etc. The poor are an asset. I first figured it out on a side note from that St. Francis movie, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, where he goes to see the Pope, and the guy's like, "Don't worry, he knows what he's doing. The Pope's bringing the poor back to us." Like, oh, the poor are an asset, coveted by the rich to be like sheep, like cattle, right? It's hilarious to me that anti-Semites will get offended by the word goyim. How dare they call us cattle? But at the same time, they say things like, "Wake up, sheeple." People are sheep, right? Okay. How dare you call me a cattle? I'm a sheep. Anyway, for time. Great Depression. So, in this period, the government also created the CIA. And so forth and so on. So, this is where capitalism began to corrupt Christianity after the Great Depression. But there's another factor in here. World War II. World War II and the Great Depression made people, the sheeple, the cattle, flock to capitalism even though they were Christians. Technically, had Christians stuck to Christianity, the Great Depression never would have happened. I'm fairly certain there are things in Christianity, depends on who's doing the interpretation, that specifically say to avoid debt. Right? There's rules and laws and regulations that regulate behavior to avoid debt. Apparently Christians, white Christians, were more European than Christian, right? They were more into drugs and sex than Jesus. And I say that because if you look at the history of Europe with the STD rates and the drug addiction rates, etc., if you look at the syphilis rates in London in the 1600s and so forth and so on, it's nature over nurture. Religion is nurture. Genetics is nature. Demographics is destiny. But epigenetics is the interaction of the environment and the genes, right? Certain genes can be activated or suppressed depending on environmental factors. Environmental factors like television, radio, magazine ads, billboards, etc. that influence you to do drugs, pornography, have sex outside of marriage, activate your sexual instinct at a very young age, etc., etc., etc. Excuse me. So, in the 1930s to the 1960s, not only did we have World War II, but the Nazis technically fought for a lot of Christian values. Technically, they did. They fought against porn and usury. Right, because you can have the Great Depression without usury. So, I'm not saying it was the Jews. I'm not saying it wasn't the Jews. I don't think Jews are a monolith. I don't think they're like the Borg, like a single hive mind, right? It's not like, oh, Jews have this psychic linked mind and they're all individual brain cells in the Jewish brain. And for me to tap into that Jewish brain, I put on the kippah. And now I'm plugged into the psychic channel, the psychic network. Activity in Sector 3. Jewish revolt detected. They're planning on Saturday. Shabbat, yeah, I know. It's funny, the conspiracies of the white supremacists. They're really entertaining. Anyway, I digress. So, the Great Depression led to an American public embrace of capitalism, even though it was capitalism that caused the Great Depression. This is how stupid the masses are. The gullible sheep. The cattle. The goyim. But communism wasn't the solution either, right? Capitalism's like the flood, communism is the drought. Communism, just like Christianity, while morally superior to capitalism, also is very poor. New Mexico is a good example of that. If we fast forward to the 1960s on, just real quick, because I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're a Spanish Catholic, and at least 5 of your kids have died to poverty-related conditions, and these people show up, and they're pushing pornography, and they're pushing marijuana, and they're pushing drugs, and they're pushing, prostitution and things like that. Well, you hate them, Your Bible, your God commands you to, get rid of them. Don't let evil take root in the land. But the economy is improving. And all of a sudden your kids aren't dying of poverty-related conditions. And things are better. You have nicer cars. You have paved roads. You have running water and electricity consistently. There's more money involved. Corrupted by capitalism. Those who eat and those who don't. Back to the 30s. World War II led to this whole concept of freedom, right? And freedom meant pleasure as well, of course, because the Nazis were against porn. This is why porn is free speech, but anti-Semitism is hate speech. Because the Nazis, right? Yeah. Does that make any sense to you when I say it that way? Because it doesn't make any sense to me when I say it that way. But that's exactly what happened. And so it caused this manipulation of the masses under the, angel-devil dichotomy, right? Agonist and antagonist. So therefore the Nazis were fascists. They were against freedom. So freedom means the freedom to do stupid, self-destructive things like smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol, etc. But it's not just a social system or an economic system or a governing system. If you look at prohibition of alcohol, which I'm just going to guess on this one, I'm guessing at least was 1930s to 1940s. In some counties out here, they're still dry counties. Prohibition of alcohol was very good for the Native American. The Native American pancreas and liver does not secrete the enzymes necessary to process and metabolize alcohol into sugar. This is why Native Americans have a 13% alcohol overdose death rate. But Whitey cannot live without his booze and his drugs. So when I frame this in my mind as a moral decision from Whitey to give up alcohol for the Native Americans, which doesn't make sense. Surely Whitey can live without alcohol, right? You're not going to die without it. Your wife will improve without it. Sobriety? Really? You're that allergic to sobriety, Whitey? Okay. Whitey would rather let Native Americans die than give up his booze. And the Jews have their own My Jewish Learning and other websites where they're like the Jews behind prohibition. The Jews behind bootlegging. The Jews were largely the rum runners. Whitey was too. This isn't just the Jews and just Whitey, and I'm sure there was a lot of Jews who were against alcohol and pro-prohibition, but Jews being very smart, right? They're very clever. So this reinforces my theory that being Jewish means not opposing evil, but exploiting it for profit at the expense of the global masses, because they're stupid anyway. I can post these videos till I'm blue in the face about the harms of marijuana, and my own race and all other races will still continue to smoke it. You can present the information. You can present the evidence. All the harms caused by marijuana. Rapes, robberies, assaults, suicides, homicides, etc., etc., etc. And they'll be like, whoa! So, why bother? Why waste your time and energy trying to save people from themselves when they're going to choose self-destructive things anyway? You might as well make money off of it and exploit it to your advantage. This is a short-term gain with a long-term loss, as we can see in the United States today, as well as Israel. And you might say, why Israel? Just real quick, I read a recent article, which I posted a thumbnail of, about a Jew opposing marijuana in France. Now, in that article, it said 8,000 Jews have moved to Israel from France because of rising anti-Semitism in France, which is caused by the influx of Islamic immigrants, African, Arab, etc., into France. But the Jews were not safe in Israel, as October 7th shows. Short-term gain, long-term loss. Immigration, legalizing marijuana, short-term gain for the people profiting from those things. Long-term loss of life. But economics model, right? Externalizing cost and labor. As long as it costs the lives of somebody else, not the person pushing the drugs that's making the profit, then it's okay. Hence the marijuana lobby. But I digress. So, Another thing in the 1930s, the Jews in Hollywood, and this isn't all Jews, but there is a documentary on the Eastern Hungarian immigrant Jews who started Hollywood because they didn't want to compete with Thomas Edison. We're putting sexual content in movies, and the Catholic Church organized a boycott. It worked. Between the 1930s and the 1960s, something happened to where the Jews did the sexual content in Hollywood in the 1960s, and there was no resistance this time. So, between the 1930s and the 1960s, that's when capitalism really began to corrupt Christianity. That's when Christians, right, despite having a Bible in their home, also had a television and a radio and newspapers and magazines. When I see articles telling me that Iran has a feminist anti-hijab revolution, I imagine a metaphorical depiction of what caused this, and it's just a plane with like a CIA logo on it, airdropping smartphones with specific apps to get specific media into the heads and minds of the masses, thus, like a shepherd herding his sheep. Go get 'em, sheep. Attack my minions. Attack your own government on my behalf. CIA. So yeah, now that we're in 2023, the same dynamics here are still being applied here by BitChute, 9gag, Facebook, YouTube, etc. Using the media to psyop the masses, essentially, for very specific outcomes, which include increased drug consumption rates, increased STDs, increased divorce rates, etc., etc., etc. Now, there is a scientific application to religion, specifically monogamy. Monogamy prevents overpopulation. Monogamy prevents the spread of STDs, prevents abortions, prevents, so forth and so on. These rates were lower before 1960, before the drug and sex revolution. The divorce rate in the United States, the single-parent household rate, the unwanted child rate, the unplanned birth rate. So when I hear people arguing that, women's liberation meant, women can get all the sperm deposited in their vagina that they want, but not be cursed with the consequences of their decision to open their legs, that's insane to me. How could people be dumb enough to fall for such obviously transparent propaganda? It started here. Now we're here. It's nuts. It's fucking nuts. I should get back to my thing. Studying and all that. There's more, and we'll get